Okay, good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. We're going to start the meeting for the Community Services Committee for Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquin Anishinaabe, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I'll ask the committee coordinator to do the roll call.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Present.
Conseillère Plante.
Ici.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Bradley.
Here.
Chair Dudas.
Suis présent.
You have quorum, Chair.
Merci. We have no declarations of interest and seeing none. Can I confirmation of the minutes from Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025? Are those minutes carried? Carried. We had 4 responses to inquiries, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3. Did anyone wish to try to lift them onto the agenda? No, seeing as such, we'll receive those. Our next item is 5.1, service agreements under the Housing Services Act 2011. We do not have a presentation, although we do have staff to answer questions. I will note that we had correspondence, a letter from Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada that we received, and I'm sure everyone read. And we have 2 delegations. We'll start with Simon Swell from the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, just getting online here. Hopefully you can hear me.
You can, please begin. You have 5 minutes, Madam.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Community Services Committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about this issue. My name is Simone Swale, and I am the Senior Manager of Government Relations for the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. CHF Canada represents over 2,200 housing co-ops, home to nearly 250,000 Canadians across all provinces and territories. Housing co-ops are mission-driven organizations that were developed to provide long-term, stable, and secure mixed-income housing as an alternative to traditional rental housing. In the city of Ottawa, there are over 50 nonprofit housing co-ops, home to over 3,500 households. Of those housing co-ops, 16 are part of the Housing Services Act system, home to 1,157 households. I'm speaking to you today because we're pleased to see the City of Ottawa move forward in the process of developing service agreements. We want to underscore the importance of this work for the 16 affected housing co-ops in your city, and we are calling on staff to work in close partnership with CHF Canada and community housing providers to ensure these agreements are a success. While there's often much fanfare about new affordable housing, our existing community housing is the backbone of our housing system, which our most vulnerable households rely on. For Housing Services Act co-ops, ensuring these service agreements are a success is fundamental to their long-term viability and ability to operate as cooperative organizations. We share your vision from your 10-year housing and homelessness plan of a home for everyone, and that central to that vision is creating a more resilient and sustainable community housing system through partnerships, shared service, and identifying efficiencies, while supporting this overall community housing sector to maximize our assets and through regeneration and redevelopment. And we really do see that as fundamental and core to our success. Since 2018, CHF Canada has been highlighting the concerns of what will happen to HSA co-ops once their initial mortgages have been paid off. We worked closely with the province on the development of the regulations for these co-ops, this Part 7.1, and have since been working with 31 service managers across Ontario that have co-ops in their communities. A successful service agreement is essential to ensuring these co-ops are sustainable and that they're able to continue to offer community-oriented housing for generations to come. The service agreement is meant to lay out for the co-ops the financial future and their ability to make decisions for the benefit of their community. While we support the recommendations to the committee, we have some reservations about some of the details provided in the report. Fundamentally, what housing co-ops are looking for is the ability to plan for and systematically address the long-term capital needs of their communities. At the end of their mortgages, these co-ops are by definition 35 years old. They need to be able to set aside greater amount of funds for asset management than was allowed under the Housing Services Act and the original part of the legislation. They need to be able to create and keep surpluses so that they can plan for and address their long-term capital capital repair backlog, and they need to have space to take on new loans when necessary. We hope that by working with staff that we can find resolutions that are appropriate for independent housing cooperatives, and we greatly appreciate that staff have already made themselves available to meet and answer some questions about this report, and we look forward to future conversations. We're very hopeful that these service agreements will represent a turning point where we can realize our shared vision of a more resilient and sustainable community housing system guided by a renewed partnership between the city and housing cooperative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today. We have a question from my colleague, Councillor Kavanagh.
I just wanted to say thank you for coming out and presenting today. Co-ops are important, and your comment about 35 years since really anything has been built. Hopefully you'll hear more about that later today. Who knows? But that's what we're all hoping for. We need those federal funds to build more, and hopefully we'll have something to have a conversation about, because I think that's our real issue, is that we haven't got new capital, and it needs to come from the federal level, since you are Canada-wide. But having been in a co-op myself, I realize their value and hope to see more. But the funding needs to come. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. You have a question from Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I just really wanted to echo Councillor Kavanagh's comments, especially around the need for capital reserves. My office has received inquiries from different co-ops at different times about the challenges that they're having as aged facilities, aged physical plant, and not being able to keep up with those capital requirements. So I just want you to know that my office has had discussions with co-ops and also with other levels of government around this issue in the past. We hear you, and we definitely want to see changes in terms of the scenarios to allow more capital retention and formation to deal with maintenance and improvements throughout the co-ops within my ward, throughout the city, and ideally throughout the province. So I really wanted to thank you for raising that real issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor King. Simone, I'm not seeing any more questions for you. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
I'll now invite our next delegate, Sarah Button from the Centretown Citizens Ottawa Corporation. Good morning, Sarah. You have 5 minutes. As soon as you get settled, you're good to go.
Good morning. Okay, I won't be too loud. Good morning. So I am Sarah Button. I'm the Executive Director of Centretown Citizens Ottawa Corporation, and I'm here this morning representing my own organization, which has 20% of the 4,200 units in the staff report. I'm also speaking on behalf of Tom Belanger from Nepean Housing and Suzanne Lee from Multi-Faith Housing. Together, our three organizations represent 34% of those total units. And together, we have hundreds of units in our development pipelines. And so I don't want there to be any doubt. We really need staff to have delegated authority for this. We need to have these conversations. This is critical. This is an existential issue for the housing sector in Ottawa, and I really can't overstate how important it is to the future thriving of this sector that we are able to have, have new service or exit agreements that enable us to get this right. Like, we need to get moving. We've had great conversations with staff already. Kale, thank you. Clara, thank you. Your teams have been wonderful. But there are some things in the staff report that are concerning for us. So two main things. One is that we don't think it's growth focused enough. And the second is that we worry that we're relying on a status quo approach that's not going to enable the change we need. So appreciate the emphasis on flexibility, but we need to emphasize the need for growth as well. So we all want to expand affordable housing, right? We're housing providers and we're developers, and but under the current funding framework, we're not enabled to use that expertise and resource to support these growth aspirations. For example, under the current framework, if we want to spend money on a site plan for a redevelopment, we're technically not allowed. That's not an allowable expense of that potential surplus. And we worry that the implicit assumption in the negotiation framework is that only the service manager can expand and protect social housing units. And we disagree with that. We think we can do it too, because we've been doing it for decades. The housing state of emergency continues, and an as-is approach doesn't enable the creation of permanent non-market housing. So we need service agreements that will enable growth and enable development and enable it with less reliance on government funds. Because nonprofit housing, non-market housing, it's still a business, and we need to treat it as such. We're under the same constraints as everyone else operating in that sector. And we are so often, I worry that we're so often concerned with protecting historical investment of public funds into affordable housing that we're not seeing how the restrictions we've placed on that housing are limiting our ability to create more. So a couple of example status quo restrictions that we're hoping that we need to be lifted are the ability to refinance existing properties explicitly to support the cost of new development, as well as capital repairs. Specifically to be able to get projects shovel ready. The report spells that out right now. It's only for capital repairs. We also need to be able to generate and use surpluses to protect existing housing and increase the supply. Currently, if we exceed a fixed allowable rental income, based on market rents that are capped below AMR, or if we don't spend as much shelter subsidy as projected, we must give that funding back. And the current model restricts our housing providers' use of any meager surpluses that we're able to earn. And the report, as it's framed right now, it proposes a status quo formula that we worry is going to perpetuate that system. We also need to be able to strengthen our communities by moving RGI units on turnover into new properties. I'm not proposing people lose their subsidy. I'm saying if we can move them around post EOA, we can bring balance to existing buildings, improve their financial performance, and provide truly affordable homes in new buildings with modern energy efficiency and modern accessibility standards. We need to be able to create new mixed income communities without the current restrictions that make them financially unsustainable. And our fear is that the assumptions in the report will lock us into the status quo. And I also want to be clear, if the position is that some of these restrictions are coming from the province or provincial legislation, let us help you take the fight to them. We're absolutely here for that too. But if these restrictions were gone tomorrow without more city funding, Nepean Housing could get 40 townhomes to net zero and have another 48 units shovel ready. Multi-Faith could do pre-development work for 78 new homes, including family homes on land they already own. CCOC would double the unit count on one of our redevelopment sites from 60 to about 120, and we need less city equity or less equity to do it. So we're asking you for flexibility in these negotiations. Removing these restrictions will unlock more development dollars from non-city sources because we will be able to move faster. Dollars are going to other cities right now, and Ottawa really needs to catch up. So to recap, we need staff to have delegated authority. This is really important. We got to get on with the work. Second, if some of these restrictions and limitations are coming from the province, please let us fight with you as allies. We are so here for that. Third, there are some assumptions in the report that assume and perpetuate a status quo and that will possibly limit our options. These existing frameworks will replicate the existing problems. And finally, non-market, permanently affordable housing should be the absolute easiest thing to build everywhere and always. Let's not entrench these systemic barriers any further. We urgently need more housing, and we need to make sure that we are not making it harder to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You came right down to the wire. Perfect timing. You have a question from Councillor Troster.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks
Hi.
for being here. And thank you to CCOC for everything that you can do. CCOC recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. They're a real stalwart in our community when it comes to affordable housing. So I think part of the issue, and I'm going to have questions for staff about this, is that some of some of what's written into the service agreements is just baked in to the funding agreements from other levels of government. Are there things in the service agreement that you think the city is imposing that is not coming from other levels of government that could be adjusted? I'll also have those questions for staff because I hear what you're saying and we want to help you develop
Yeah.
more affordable housing. Sometimes we're given pretty heavy strings with
Yeah.
funding, right?
Yeah, no, and absolutely we are. And I think there are things that we can probably untangle. I think those are things that probably need untangling with legal advice and legal perspective on it, because my understanding of the legislative framework and the regulations that the province released in 22 is that there should be some wiggle room there. There should be some flexibility there. And this is where I'm saying, we can take the fight to the province with the city, because I think there should be more flexibility there than what is coming verbatim into that report. That's my impression. Like I said, I think that's where we really start to get into the weeds and need to figure out specifically which pieces are coming from where.
And so you're telling me that you are not allowed, according to the service agreement with the city, to refinance your properties?
We need permission.
Okay.
So we are I guess in theory permitted, but we need permission to do so, and the purposes for which we can do so are limited. So refinancing a provincial property requires permission from the service manager and from the province. And I understand that we're in the process of, that is one of the things that is, one of those key motions is to let that be the city essentially extend what OCH has been doing for years to some of the other
Right.
housing providers. That is excellent.
Yes.
My fear is that if we are limited to only using that for capital repair purposes, we short circuit ourselves from being able to put some of that towards new development, which would allow us to get these development pipelines going. Often funding structures are such that you can't get your big financing until you're already shovel ready, and it can cost $1 million to get there. So refinancing where we are allowed to put some of that, some of that equity, or if that building is then able to generate a little bit of a surplus into pre-development work, lets us get projects closer to development ready more quickly without having to come for pre-development funding from the city or for seed funding from CMHC. So that's one of the things that it lets us unlock, is a little bit more flexibility. The capital repair need is very real and very important, but we do need a little bit of flex there so that we can use that funding for other things too.
Okay. And do you know of any other jurisdictions where they've worked that flexibility into service agreements? Do you see any other best practices anywhere else that you think we should emulate?
Not offhand. There are only a couple of jurisdictions that have released their template agreements, and it seems to be very hit or miss. I think there are a couple of jurisdictions just kind of in the GTA, Greater Golden Horseshoe, where they have draft agreements out, some of which are looking good and some of which are looking less good. I don't have specifics on that, but I can reach out to colleagues in that area and find out.
That'd be great. And yeah, feel free to reach out to my office if you want
Will
to
do.
work on this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much for coming out today.
You're welcome.
Now, I realize it's important to have more than one source of non-market housing. I'm chair of Ottawa Community Housing, and we're big, but I do see the need for others, and so I'm hoping that we can work together on this.
Absolutely.
Because there's a variety. But I guess the importance is what the federal government does and gives us the dollars.
Always.
I'm
Yeah.
kind of, I think people are going to watch and see what happens. But that's the promise, and I know a lot depends on that, I would say.
It absolutely does. And I think, the success, the incredible success that OCH has had over the past, 5 to 10 years, I think speaks to what's possible when there is a little bit more flexibility, because I think OCH has had that. I was reading in this very report that some of these things have changed for OCH about 13 years ago. So, and they have been able to do amazing stuff, right? They've got something like 1,000 units under construction right now. Amazing. And so I think there's absolutely a multiplier possible, and having more flexibility, come what may, from other levels of government, lets us access different sources of funding and lets us get closer to ready to grab those dollars when they are available. And that's part of what we're looking for.
Yeah, and OCH has been working on it hard to get there.
I know.
For that reason, and but it works, and
It does.
and so, but other sources are good as well. So
Mhm.
so hopefully we'll hear good things and work together.
Absolutely.
All right, thank
Oh,
you.
and OCH has been a great partner for us as well. So
Good,
appreciate that.
good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Lowe.
Thanks very much. I'm interested in your comment about having to return the funding when if you don't, if you don't use it up. Are there ever situations where, or I guess has there been a situation where you don't use the funding, you return it, and then you get that second hit next year when they decrease your funding because you didn't use up your funding the previous year?
So that mechanism of don't use the funding, return it, then have to ask for more. It's not affecting CCOC quite as much. We're larger and our scale lets us weather some of that a little bit more. That one's hitting more for some of the smaller organizations. And so I can't speak as much to the detail of that. There is usually a little bit of wiggle room there. And so we can say, okay, we're close to the target, or we're oh, we've used it all up. And so now we're gonna, we're not gonna try and use any more. But it's a bit of a different situation for smaller organizations.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. Suzanne Lee from MHI would be able to speak to that in detail.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Sarah, I don't see any further questions for you, but thank you very much for being here today. And I'm sure that some of your comments will prompt questions to staff. So
Thanks, folks. I
thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much. We have no further delegations, so I will invite staff to come up to the front. And we'll open up the floor. You turned it off. You have a question from Councillor Troster.
Hi, Kayla. Thanks for being here. This question will be unsurprising to you. What is stopping us from allowing organizations like CCC to refinance their properties for the purpose of financing new development?
Thank you, Chair. The real reason is the province and the Housing Services Act. So a lot of what's outlined in the report is prescribed to us through the Housing Services Act. I'll say that we do share the same goals as MHI, CCOC, and Nepean Housing, who are presenting there. We agree with that we need this flexibility to keep these pipelines of projects, and our plan is to be working through some of these requests, advocacy with our Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table to make changes to our update in the 10-year Housing and Homelessness Plan. But 100% agree with their comments, and we need that additional flexibility.
Okay, well, I see that Councillor Brockington is sitting beside me, who's our representative on the board of AMO, and the AMO conference is in town at the end of August or mid-August. And I think, I'll speak to Councillor Brockington. This might be a chance to get some of our community housing folks in front of some cabinet ministers when they're in town for lobbying meetings to explain this problem to them. Because, take it right to the source when it comes to advocacy. So I know I have some other issues that I'd like to get in front of the provincial government at the AMO conference too. So it's good to start thinking about it. It's going to be a long one. Yeah, I know, because we have a lot of issues we want to talk about, but I see Clara nodding her head too. But yeah, that's a good one to take forward. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, the deadline is May 30th for us to put our delegation requests in. So please do that. River Ward has 7 co-ops, maybe the most of any, and we don't have the most units, but certainly a number of co-ops, a lot of long-standing co-ops. And I really like the model. The fact that we have not maintained the construction of co-ops is a real shame in this province and city, because it's a model that works and that I support, and we need it. And they're resident led, which is also good. Residents take sort of the leadership role of this model, which has both advantages and disadvantages. And without sounding too negative, I want to talk about some of the challenges I witness in my ward with a little flexibility, Madam Chair, because I don't know how many times we have an opportunity to talk about co-ops. But my observations over the years with resident-led boards, resident-led governance structure is there at times a lack of skill set to manage a co-op, to focus on the care of the co-op, repairing it and planning ahead, having the vision required to plan for those capital repairs, even to think critically about how to refinance mortgages, which are critical for the long-term sustainability of the co-op themselves. And regrettably, I see personal conflicts sort of interfere with those duties. And there's a reluctance to increase monthly fees to address the need for long-term planning. I used to be my condo president. There's a requirement, a provincial requirement under the Condo Act for condos to plan 30 years out, to have a reserve fund, to make sure there's sufficient funds in place to take care of the corporation. And we see at least co-ops in my ward who have not planned for the long term, Madam Chair. And now it's coming back to bite them because they're trying to deal with a backlog of capital repairs and some who want to refinance their mortgages. So in the spirit of making strong, sound decisions going forward, can staff just comment on whether this is an issue? And how can we make sure that co-ops are on better footing going forward so that capital projects are being addressed, mortgage refinancing options are well known to them, and if there are governance issues, perhaps the city can offer advice on how to mitigate those and deal with those sooner rather than later. I appreciate your comments.
Thanks for the question, Chair. You make some good points, and I'll say across the entire housing sector, there's issues with different providers that come out throughout. So it is something that we focus on very closely as a city, as staff. As you may be aware, there's a large set of the portfolio of co-ops that are managed municipally. So we have direct oversight, and there's a large portion that are not managed municipally. So a couple of things that we do on our side within the city is that we have a program and administrator directly overseeing each of the co-ops. Their job and role is to provide that advice, guidance, mortgage refinancing, and really support them to be able to make sure they're economically viable in the long term. With that, we do have limited levers in some places, as I think government should, in terms of what we can actually do in terms of oversight. However, we do have mechanisms in terms of our funding that we can pull back, redirect as needed when these issues arise. We also have with our oversight role. We're able to work with their governance structure, board of directors, when needed. We do have a number with our agreements, legal mechanisms to go in and have a little bit more additional oversight when people are slipping to make those corrections. So there are mechanisms for us. I think another really important one that we try and do is work closely with groups like CHF and the different housing cooperative membership groups that provide this oversight and guidance. We regularly meet with those folks as well to ensure that their vision and guidance they're providing is in line with what the city would want to see, and make sure we're taking that collaborative approach, keeping those wonderful things in line that co-ops do, with also maintaining that from the city side of things, making sure they're financially viable in the long term for the residents that are there. So it is a balancing act, to be clear. But the model, again, when it's working well, works extremely, extremely well. And it really has that residents who live there, that buy-in, that interest in maintaining their own assets. So positives and negatives, but I do think the city has the appropriate mechanisms and levers within those service agreements to be able to rein in and support where needed.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Can I just ask a follow-up? And that is there an assessment, at least on an annual basis, for the co-ops that the city has a formal relationship with, looking at their budget, their reserve funds, their capital plan for, I don't know how many years they have to plan out for co-ops, but does the city of Ottawa do that? And is there intervention by the city if the city believes there isn't sufficient focus on ABC? Do we really get in there?
Thank you for the question. We do that. So we are required to maintain and with private oversight, we review their financial statements each year. So there is quite intensive in terms of the financial oversight we have. On the capital side, we have all housing providers are required to do asset planner. So that is that projection of capital need. And we do monitor that. So the city employs 2 technical sessions, which are on the engineering side, which support that whole programming, making sure that we have a good plan from a portfolio perspective to be able to support with those capital needs. I think you've heard it here as well. We're stretching way too few dollars very far as that currently goes. But of course, and when we're taking that portfolio approach, we are able to address the ones that are most in need, most critical in terms of time frame as well. And yet again, certainly as that financial oversight, that's done on a yearly basis. We completely review all of the financial statements viability. And when we need to do corrective actions, we take those through the agreement.
Thank you. I'll just end, Madam Chair, by thinking out loud here and whether there would be an opportunity to have some sort of I'll just call it a public workshop where maybe every, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, the city invites all co-ops in person together and have a half-day information learning session where we really underline and reinforce some of those areas where we know co-ops are struggling, like sharing best practices, education. And again, if staff are doing it, great, but I raise this, Madam Chair, because it is a real and significant issue that my office is engaged in way too much more than what we should be. And a lot of it is those interpersonal challenges that exist within communities, which overtake their need to do that long-term visioning and investment in saving. So anyway, I'll leave it there, but strongly support co-ops. I appreciate the motion that's before us and what the delegate shared, but there's some other challenges that exist that I think we need to make some improvements on. But thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. I'm sure staff will take your comments into consideration. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thank you, Kale. No, the problem is there's few dollars and we're trying to squeeze as much out as we can. But I'm also wondering, has this been exasperated by the fact that there's been so much download over the years to the province? Like this was done federally before the housing. And I don't know if that's going to come back. I'm hoping. I seem to have that theme today. But would that help ease things? Because we seem to be stuck with regulations that just aren't working for us to produce non-market housing.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I wouldn't say that is the single issue. It was a prescribed formula when it was downloaded, and I think we need to take into consideration, and this is going to be something we're looking into the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, of what is best for the municipality, because there are advantages to having it at the provincial level, but there are also advantages to having that level of flexibility at the municipal level. One of the benefits of having it downloaded to our level is that we have additional oversight. I think one of the key things we need to do at whatever level it sits is that we have that ongoing sustained commitment of what our funding amounts are to be able to do this. The download, again, it was prescribed, so the money's still there. I think one of the other things that exacerbates this is that with construction costs, repair costs, and just the general changes in the economy since it was downloaded, that prescribed funding formula, although it was adjusted for inflation when it was originally created, we've seen inflation rates high above what would have been anticipated at the time that was done. So there are challenges there, but I will say we work very closely with both the federal and provincial partners to raise these needs. There's agreement across us, other municipalities, that more can be done. So we're going to continue to work through the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table and the 10-year plan to try and address some of those. But again, I wouldn't say it's wholly due just to having it downloaded.
Are you saying it'd be better to download it directly to the municipalities, the decision making?
There would be advantages and disadvantages to both model. I think this is one of those ones where you can't do anything in isolation. There's benefits and drawbacks to each. So again, we haven't as a sector, I think, made that unanimous decision of would we want to advocate one way or another. That's something we're going to have to contemplate through the next 10-year plan, because again, these end of service agreements and these big picture questions are just starting to come to fruition this year when we're having these end of mortgages. So it's really a new problem across the province.
Anyways, I can certainly relate to the point about just keeping up on maintenance, because since funding was not provided, capital funding was, for building was provided as long ago as 30 years ago. Everything's needs to be repaired, and the catch up is incredible. Just on the stock we have, which we could lose if we don't take care of it. But also we need to build and move forward. So it's a dual thing. So hopefully that will be looked after soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just one final comment I want to make. We are going to be bringing a capital repair report that looks at our whole community housing portfolio in 2026. So we're going to have a much better picture of what that looks like. And of course, that will be eventually rolled into an update of our long-range financial plan. So we have that really comprehensive picture of what is it going to take to maintain existing SOCs, existing service levels, as well as our need for new development and continue to expand the portfolio.
Great. Thank you so much, Kev.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to just talk about the social housing operating agreements a little bit more and our advocacy to other orders of government, given the massive hole that they're going to leave it. It's not a new problem. Yes, some of them are coming up now, but it's been 10 years that we've been seeing this gradual decrease happening, and it gets worse and worse as the years go on. There's huge drops that come. They're starting now, those huge drops, but they continue to drop down. So just, I guess, in your experience, does that amount of funding that the federal and provincial governments had dedicated to these mortgages over time, is it being replaced by other funding? And is that funding direct, or is it more application based in your experience?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So the funding, yes, although prescribed, it has been direct. So we have been continuing to receive capital repair funding. That primarily comes through what's called OFI, which is a provincial program. So we receive, when mentioned, around 67 million to do that. However, those have remained relatively stable despite costs rising. So that is the ongoing issue. We also don't have a confirmed funding amount for this upcoming year. So it just creates challenges with long-term planning about what we're going to do. It's kind of on an ad hoc basis. And we have a pipeline of what we need to do in terms of capital repair projects that we manage through Asset Planner. But again, without that sustained long-term funding vision of what does this look like over the next 15 years, it is challenging. As mentioned in the report too, we do have some big opportunities coming up, and as our delegates had presented, we want to be looking at things like what other financial tools can we leverage, such as mortgage refinancing. Also mention, even with OCH, although they were doing that a number of years ago, that is also only for capital repairs. It's not having that visionary long-term expansion mindset that the delegations were talking to about using that to be able to refinance to do new development. So we will be looking for that flexibility. I think we can all agree where it makes sense and we're maintaining existing service levels that we should be taking those alternate financing mechanisms.
Yeah, after meeting with Sarah Budden, it is painfully obvious that flexibility needs to be there. So just encourage staff as much as possible to work with those partners to allow that flexibility within our own jurisdiction, of course, given there's provincial and federal overlap. The last thing I'll just mention is it's not just the capital repair fund, right? The social housing operating agreements were important for funding those mortgages in the first place. Is there any indication from the federal and provincial governments that they're going to re-up that? Because we are seeing billions of dollars of cliffs dropping off now. And in my experience, they haven't just been replacing one for one of all those dollars that were there previously. They've had some application-based stuff. They've had some stuff that is direct, but it's not replacing the huge amount of money that was there in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. So is there any indication they're going to re-up on the actual payment of mortgages for, given there's a new prime minister, it was talked about a lot in the campaign, is now a good time to start writing a letter to them, making sure the city's on record of saying, start to re-up, get back in the affordable housing game, start paying for those social housing mortgages again, like we did in decades past, which got us through to a time now that we're seeing massive increases in housing costs.
Thank you, Chair. It's a good point you make. So no, they have not indicated that they're going to be re-upping on mortgages. However, now that we're coming to those end of mortgages for those 35-year mortgages, where I think that's going to become more of a question, and the federal and provincial governments are going to see the size of scope it is, when all of us, as the only mechanism we have to be able to deal with it, is through mortgage refinancing. So that's once we have the size and scope of what amount of mortgage refinancing do we do, would we want to come with an ask back to the federal and provincial governments about how could we potentially actually use that to support the mortgage refinancing.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Kayla, I'm not seeing any further questions for you. So is this item carried? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to item 6.1, Parks and Facilities Bylaw Review. We do have a presentation from staff, so I'll let Dan get settled in and we'll queue up the presentation.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. We're here this morning to talk to you about an update to the Parks and Facilities Bylaw, a project that we've been working on over the last year. With me this morning is Viola to my immediate left, and Josh, who will join us momentarily. These are the two staff that were the true architects of this that did a lot of the consultation. We did extensive consultation on this. We reviewed the work that municipalities that have gone before us in terms of both the bylaw and more specifically, perhaps the new piece of this that is the personal consumption of alcohol, which is contained within this bylaw review. So we will take you through just a brief presentation to go through this. This report looks at the bylaw in a comprehensive way. The old bylaw that existed dated back to 2004 and was a first attempt at the new city of bringing together all of the former bylaws. It, of course, is now 20 years in and is somewhat outdated. And so it was time for a review. Okay. This forward. Technical difficulties here. So by way of background, the current bylaw is out of date and was part of what was identified as part of the comprehensive bylaw review program the council approved as part of the 2023-2026 bylaw review plan. It looked at a whole variety of things, including encroachments and parts of the bylaw that were not properly addressed in the 2004 bylaw. We did extensive research in terms of what other municipalities were doing, what best practices were, what technology had evolved that was being used in parks to and that needed to be comprehended within the bylaw. We also received a direction in March of 2004 from Councillor Menard, I believe, to look at the new provincial regulations that allowed municipalities to identify areas where personal consumption of alcohol would be allowed as designated by the municipality. So that formed a good part of our work. And of course, is perhaps the most talked about piece of this bylaw review. Scope of the bylaw, of course, we looked at all of the things that the former bylaw included, and some things have not changed. The park hours were adjusted I believe somewhere around 2010 to make parks open earlier at 5 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. And that was primarily to accommodate dog walkers that wanted to walk their dogs before work. We have maintained that. It has not been problematic. And as well as look at, opening and closing dates of sports fields, all of the things that you see listed on the left side of this presentation. It's important to note that this bylaw does not contain everything that impacts on parks. There are separate bylaws that address other aspects of park use, most notably the dogs and parks bylaw, which is probably the one that's most often referred to, but as well as other waste in parks and other pieces of regulation that impact the overall administration of parks. In terms of key issues, we looked at activities that this bylaw regulates. And one of the things that we identified is that even though it's a parks and facilities bylaw, the original bylaw did not adequately cover the facilities part, what goes on in our recreation and cultural buildings across the city. Because of that, you will note in the writing of the new bylaw that it often says parks and facilities, so that the provisions, either restrictive or permissive, now include activities that are within our buildings. The bylaw reflects some of the modern aspects of recreation now, new technologies, and we've deliberately taken an approach to try to be more permissive with the bylaw in terms of allowing more things except where they are prohibited, as opposed to the other way around where the previous bylaw restricted a lot of things as opposed to where it was permitted. We also took our cue from Toronto, who had their bylaw in the media quite a bit, most notably for things that seem to be silly inclusions in the bylaw. And so we did comb through this one, and I think we've done a pretty good job of removing things that may at one time have had a purpose. For example, you were not allowed to use a walking cane on a skating rink. I don't know what happened 20 or 30 years ago, but apparently that was a thing and needed to be covered by the bylaw. So that is gone. We've also removed the bylaw provision that didn't allow children to climb trees in parks. Even though, you know, there are perhaps hazards to this, we don't think that we needed to include that in the bylaw. So we did pay attention to that. In terms of things that are now permissible unless specifically prohibited, it's things like fishing. We found out through the pandemic, people wanted to go fish in parks. And if you had a shoreline park, you were not allowed to fish off a shoreline of a park unless it was specifically allowed. We've changed that, so now you can fish in a park. Launch kayaks and canoes. Again, people wanted space to go and launch kayaks and canoes. The previous bylaw said only where the general manager has designated a spot. We have 1,000 parks. We cannot designate spots in every park. So we've taken a more pragmatic approach of allowing people to do things unless there's a specific reason. In the case of launching boats, for example, we might prohibit that at a beach so that it doesn't interfere with swimming, but otherwise would not do that. So personal consumption of alcohol in parks, this stems from a change in provincial regulations and the request from council that we have a look at this. We did an environmental scan. There was the Toronto experience was well publicized. And we had to look at both the first time that they looked at it and decided on a pilot project, the end of their pilot project and what they learned, and the new regulations that they now have in place, which I believe allow 45 or so parks to be have allowed for consumption. We talked to internal stakeholders. So we talked to city departments that might be impacted by this, Public Works from the maintenance aspect, Ottawa Public Health. A lot of the Toronto debate was about the health impacts of alcohol consumption, normalizing alcohol consumption. We joined and participated in a national group on alcohol policy, just to be well informed in terms of the impacts of alcohol and allowing it in public spaces and those kinds of things. And so we learned a lot through that process. We also talked to bylaw from an enforcement point of view, from Ottawa Police from a safety and security point of view. Both Ottawa Public Health and Ottawa Police have provided letters that were attached to this report that provide their perspective on this. And then we set up, Viola and Josh set up pop-ups in parks where they went and talked to everyday park users about their perspective on doing this. Parents with their kids at the play structures, sports field users, those kinds of folks. And we got a pretty good perspective, and the slide shows here that there is a pretty even split between people that are all for it or people that are dead against it. And there's a middle ground where people could entertain the idea, but only in certain parks under certain conditions. So what we are recommending, and staff have, because we've gotten feedback from both sides, and of course we talked to each member of council, and much like the numbers you saw on the previous slide, we sense a split in terms of the level of comfort of doing this. And so what we really looked at in terms of a recommendation is to offer you options of where you could go. What is in the report, should it be approved without an altering motion, is that the city would equip itself through its bylaw with the authority through consultation between the GM and a ward councillor to designate parks within the ward. It doesn't oblige anyone to do it. It doesn't create a program that will actively pursue it, but if a councillor is interested, we would work with the ward councillor in doing it. There was an option in the report, and I believe there is now a motion for consideration that we do a pilot. And so the motion looks at taking option one, which is what is in the report, and simply putting a pilot period on it. So allowing it in any park as in consultation with the councillor, but only from the July to October period for that for a first try at this. So a pilot project. Council also has the ability to move a motion to simply remove this and not entertain alcohol in parks, or to simply approve that all parks be alcohol allowed, and that we not entertain a further process. We just simply allow it. Those are not in the report, but those are possible motions should council want to go there and decide not to do anything more than that. So in terms of updates, we've tried to improve the language and clarify where definitions were difficult in the previous bylaw. We simplified and condensed the sections so it's an easier read. As I've mentioned, a more permissive approach to park use rather than prohibit and then allow. And then we've aligned with current practices and innovation, things like drones that didn't exist, things like scooters and e-bikes. All those were not covered in the previous bylaw because they did not exist. They do now, and so we really did have to update those perspectives of the bylaw. Implementation strategies, of course, as is always the case with bylaws, there would be an education period and a focus on ongoing education and awareness. Some significant updates to ottawa.ca, especially if we look at personal consumption in parks. And bylaw would continue to do the enforcement primarily on a complaint basis reacting to issues in the park. And that committee is the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, General Manager Chenier. As you mentioned, we do have a motion that will come before us. So before we go to delegations, I will ask that Councillor Troster reads it in, just so we know what we will be discussing following our delegation. Councillor Troster?
Thank you. This is on behalf of Councillor Menard. Whereas many Canadian cities, including Edmonton and Toronto, implemented pilot phases as a key step in larger reviews of policies governing alcohol consumption in public parks. Whereas some councillors have indicated a desire for a pilot to both gather more information on program implementation and park criteria suitability. Therefore, be it resolved that option 1 at page 11 of the report be amended to read as follows. Apply the criteria prescribed in this bylaw to identify parks where personal consumption can be allowed from July 1st to October 31st, 2025. To allow the councillor in each ward to work in consultation with the general manager and their communities to identify eligible parks and decide on designating them or not to permit personal consumption of alcohol. Be it further resolved that committee recommend that staff direct staff to implement option 1 as amended, and be it further resolved that that committee directs staff to report back on data from the pilot to Community Services Committee by Q2 2026.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. So we'll discuss that following our delegation. I would like to invite Cheryl Parrott, who I believe is online. So just let Cheryl get set up. Welcome, Cheryl. And I mean, you've done this before. You have 5 minutes, Madame, and feel free to get started.
Okay, thanks so much. And thank you for this opportunity to speak. This is important for me personally. I'm a resident of Hintonburg, and I'm really concerned about the alcohol consumption in parks policy. I live very close to a park on our main street in Hintonburg, and it's located next to an LCBO. Drinking in Somerset Square starts at 10 a.m. every day, as soon as the LCBO opens, and it continues all day and sometimes into the evening. Sometimes it's more discreet, sometimes it is not discreet whatsoever. There's no public washroom nearby. So the flower gardens that I and other volunteers help to maintain have become the washroom for both types of human elimination, unfortunately. And one of the other issues is when it becomes an area where people drink all the time is the F word is uttered about every third word at a volume that makes it impossible to ignore. And this is not when people are arguing or fighting. This is just normal conversation. There's beer cans that are strewn about. Sometimes broken glass does happen. And aggression and fights do happen. Not all the time, but they do happen. One of our gardeners was assaulted a few years back in the garden by one of the drinkers. So it makes gardening and sitting in this park unpleasant. And we have just a quarter of the park space that the city says is needed for health. So we're underserved in terms of park space. So we don't have a lot. And right across the street from Somerset Square is OCISO, Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organization. It's a 9-story residential building directly across from the park. And this is a very affordable nonprofit building. The tenants in this building have no amenity space and no central air conditioning. And the Muslim women and their children used to come and sit by the fountain that's in the park on the nice summer evenings. Since the LCBO moved to its location, they no longer come to Somerset Square. But interestingly, they came out again during the LCBO strike in July of 2024, when none of the drinkers were in the park. And bylaw will not enforce here. I have asked, they have refused because of safety issues for their officers. And I understand that. Police do come from time to time when the aggression starts to really ramp up. But you can see from their letter that was attached to this report, clearly they don't have the capacity to deal with these issues unless it becomes violent. So they say adequate bylaw enforcement presence and clear guidelines for managing alcohol consumption would be essential. And the recommendations talk about allowing alcohol consumption in some parks, but not other parks, and some of the time, but not all of the time. Distance requirements from play equipment and pools. But this seems like an enforcement nightmare. Which parks? Where can you drink? Where can you not drink? How are you supposed to remember the intricacies of the prohibitions and the measurements? Parks vary widely in location and how they're used. Will there be signs up saying you're 5 meters away from this playground, so you can't drink here, but you can drink over there? These issues affect how this park I'm just really concerned about how this will be implemented and this complicated matrix of rules that will have to be followed and the lack of enforcement. Bylaw has a difficult time now keeping up with their ever-increasing workload, and it's not adequately resourced at the present. And adding one more difficult to enforce bylaw doesn't help. So I urge you to keep the prohibition on consuming alcohol in parks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. You have a question from Councillor Charlester.
Hi, Cheryl. Well, first of all, I've spoken to Councillor Leeper. It's certainly not his intention to designate Somerset Square for the purposes of a pilot. We've already had a conversation about that. But, I have similar issues at Dundonald Park where there's an LCBO right there. But my question to you is, it's technically not allowed now and it's happening anyway. And I know the demand in my community for enforcement is when there's bad behavior, harassment, public intoxication, yelling, anything that's problematic. My question to you is how you think it would really substantially change? Because right now, if simple possession of alcohol is not being enforced at all, what difference would it make, do you think?
It at least gives you an ability to call and say there is some bad behavior happening. If when bylaw get there and there's no bad behavior, nothing's going to happen. But how do it's very difficult, I think, to say this park it's okay, this park it's not okay. And how do you sign that? Like, how do people know where it's okay to do it, where it's okay not to do it? What volume of discussion becomes yelling? To me, it's an enforcement nightmare, and especially for bylaw. How are they going to enforce this? People are drinking in the playground right beside the play equipment. By the time enforcement comes, which is often hours later, that's not happening.
Okay, well, I would argue that's happening already now. So I still don't think that a change like this would actually make a substantial difference if what we're looking at is enforcement of bad behavior, as you mentioned, right? Where there are existing bylaws and there are existing criminal laws for that. But I do appreciate your perspective. I know it's a tricky one. I know certainly some residents who live near Dundonald Park agree with you. I'll have some more comments after questions to staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlester. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Cheryl, for being here and all your contributions to the municipality on various topics. You mentioned the spot that you're concerned about doesn't have a washroom. Are you aware of the criteria that staff have recommended in terms of a pilot project around ensuring access to washrooms, drinking water, things like ensuring well-lit parks and choosing locations away from schools?
I am.
And do you think that might be a better sort of precaution rather than right now where it seems there are no criteria and it's happening anyway?
I think people won't see the difference. They'll just understand that you can drink it in park. That's my concern about this. And, I see the motion that was put forward for you to go to October. So we have Parkdale Park. It has a washroom, but it has it only during certain hours and certain months. So otherwise, there's no washroom, and there's no other park that has a washroom.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how that all gets sorted out. To me, it's just a real huge complication that will confuse everyone, and everyone will think you can just drink anywhere.
Yeah, I'm big on washrooms in parks. I'd brought several motions about washrooms in parks for councillors to be able to put washrooms in parks if they didn't have them there in the past. And usually those they can run for 6 months, usually the period till October. I just wanted to mention, I think when I think about what you're saying about where to do it and signage and that sort of thing, I think about the dogs and like the off leash, on leash, you know, whether the dogs are welcome in that park or not. There are bylaws that require a bit more information. And then the pilots that I guess we've seen in you know, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, many of them have set out parameters with very few complaints that have occurred. And so I suspect that the situation we have now is actually probably, from your perspective, probably worse than it would be after criteria are developed in my view. And maybe this is something to give a chance and see how it goes. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Conseillère Plante.
Yeah, hi Cheryl. Nice to see you. So we had a really lengthy discussion about this at Action Sandy Hill last night. And one of the sort of criteria that we thought would be beneficial is if a park is located near food. I believe the Toronto requirements are this as well. So, you know, I was just wondering what your thoughts are about that, is having a park that's designated for drinking near a place where people can grab something to eat, something you think would be beneficial?
Part of the problem is, you know, in the example I gave, Somerset Square is on our main street, so it's near food. You know, it's the biggest problem. So I'm not sure that that criteria would be helpful in this instance whatsoever. Yeah. And Parkdale Park, just to clarify, Parkdale Park, there is the Parkdale Market is there, so they open the bathrooms up from sort of 8 to 4, from June to maybe the beginning of October. Well, no, actually, sort of the end of the summer when they have staff there. But otherwise, there is no bathroom there, and no other parks have a bathroom. So, to me, this just is really complicated.
Thank you, Councillor Plante, and thank you for being here, Cheryl. I see no further questions for you at this time.
Thank you.
So we will move to questions to staff. I will note that we also have Dr. Arneson, our interim medical officer of health, online. So if there's any questions for Ottawa Public Health, feel free to ask them. And seeing that Councillor Brockington is first up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, staff, for the report and the briefing, I believe, last week. So I just want to have a better understanding. The consultation with the public, consultation with members of council did not reveal a majority in support of proceeding with this bylaw change. Why do it then? You made reference to the fact that there were letters from OPH and OPS. You did not mention both organizations oppose the change. The police do not support this. Ottawa Public Health do not support this. You do not have majority support from the public or members of council. Why are you proposing this change?
Chair, first of all, this was a bylaw review and not a proposal to launch into an alcohol in parks program. It's amending the bylaw to make it possible to provide the mechanism. So that is what we are recommending in Section 8 of the bylaw. We also had from the inquiry a request that we look at and make provision in our update to the bylaw to address this. And so that's what we've done. And you know, there were significant internal debates about how to best position this to give council the ability to act on it if they so wish, but also to make it clear that if you want to do nothing at all, we can do nothing at all. The status quo can prevail. It really is based the way that the bylaw is written now on a councillor actually deciding that they wish to have parks within their area designated. So we tried to find the balance between saying a hard no on it, because we got a sense from some councillors, from some members of the community that seemed to be somewhat supportive of it, that there was room to look at it, perhaps pilot, do something. So we tried to strike a balance, but as I said during the presentation, council can also decide to move a motion to simply replace section 8 of the bylaw with the old provision, which was essentially a hard no.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I acknowledge you have done what council asked you to do. You brought us this the revised bylaw forward, and appreciate where we're at today. In parks where the city has agreements with licensed eateries or restaurants, I think in at least 3 of our parks, how do you envision the discussion with these businesses if alcohol is going to be allowed to freely be consumed in parks where they're running their business, trying to make it viable? Do you envision any challenges or concerns in this regard?
Chair, the where we have alcohol, and it's primarily at the beach parks, that where this happens, we envision that the lessees will likely not allow people who may have alcohol in the park to bring it onto their patio or in their premises, which I think would be aligning with their provincial licensing. We've made no other provisions to say in those parks, because we also recognize that those parks are probably candidates to be considered because they are district parks, they are large, and there are places away from the concession where I think it would be reasonable to assume that it would not have a significant impact on the business. The other aspect that we looked at for similar for those parks, others as well perhaps, is a concern that we received from the festival industry, where they will rent a portion of the park, take Dragon Boat or Hope or those types of festivals. City folk at Lansdowne would be another example, where they create a perimeter and within that perimeter serve their own alcohol. And there is a provision in this bylaw that would allow the lessee, again, the organizers, to decide whether they wanted to let people within their perimeter in with their own alcohol. I suspect they would not, because they either don't want alcohol within their area, or they want to sell alcohol within their area because it's part of their business plan. So we've tried to anticipate those things. There may be other situations we've not anticipated, but we've tried to consider how this might play out in a park that is designated.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask something unrelated to alcohol, and that is the boat launch comment that you made a little earlier on. So in the example of Mooney's Bay, so to date, boat launching of personal watercraft is not permitted. My understanding is this bylaw would allow that to happen. Do you envision creating an area on the beach where people can do that to sort of separate them from intersecting with beachgoers and have a dedicated spot where people can launch watercraft?
Chair, this bylaw would certainly allow for that by lifting the general prohibition. The whole discussion of watercraft near a beach has always been one up for discussions. If it can be accommodated, we could certainly look at that. We had not specifically planned on doing that, and at least for this summer, not having looked at it, I suspect that the general prohibition on launching from the beach area, which is still a restrained area between the buoys that we're talking about, anything beyond that, I think is fair game. I think we'd have to look a little bit more closely at how we would handle something different than that.
So just so I'm clear, if the bylaw passes, is there still a restriction on the launch of personal watercraft? Because I thought the opposite was happening.
At the beaches. Because we've identified beaches as an area where we would designate no launch, simply because of the conflict between canoes and kayaks and swimmers within the demarked area of the swim area.
Okay, fair enough. I think I'll follow up with you before council, but I appreciate that clarification that I needed. So finally, my last question is, if this passes and if a local councillor has concerns about permitting alcohol in parks, the councillor in essence would have, in consultation with yourself, a veto to ensure that if it was the will of their community not to have alcohol in parks, the councillor would be able to provide that direction and that would be respected.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Lowe.
Thanks very much, Chair. There was a comment made earlier about through the updates introduced in this bylaw, plus other bylaws that we have existing, that there's a lot of difficulties and challenges in understanding what is and what is not permitted, whether it's alcohol, whether it's dogs and leashes and stuff, what is and what isn't permitted at our various city parks. Are there plans as part of this bylaw or separately? Like, can we consider things like a harmonized signage system to help people better understand what that park, what is and what isn't permitted at that park as they enter that park?
Chair, we have not devised a comprehensive signage program as part of this. As I said, the focus of this, the scope of this review was the bylaw. There was nothing in the bylaw that would speak against that. We do recognize that there are a variety of activities that go on in parks that people are not clear on what the bylaw says. The good news is that this lists a lot of the prohibitions that in the past, they may have been doing it, not know that they were breaking the bylaw. They may be climbing a tree and not realize that they were subject to a fine. With respect to alcohol, the personal consumption of alcohol, should council decide to approve that, I think we will have to look at a variety of things because it's a pilot. I think we would want to make it economical and flexible so that we do not get into expenses that could be deemed permanent and considerable. I appreciated you sent along a suggested what a sign might look like. And long term, that would certainly be an expensive option. Right now, if we do signage at all, it would be, like I said, T-rails and metal plate type of thing. Toronto, one of the learnings from the Toronto bylaw, their first implementation is they overdid signs. They got criticized because of the number of signs and the size of the signs in the parks. It was just, I guess, too much, and people took objection to it. We want to do an education. We certainly, if there are parks approved, we are developing a web presence for this. We understand that because this is something new, that we'll have to do more than usual to provide good information. So a web presence, and we can discuss with a councillor as we're discussing parks, what they would like to see in terms of on-site. But to me, for a pilot project, I think we'd want to keep it simple.
Okay, no, I understand, and I can appreciate the comments about signage too, right? On our roads, we have big issues. We have some issues on our roads with sign pollution, but that's obviously a separate issue. I think that's something that we can continue discussing separate from this item into the future, because as these things evolve, as we perhaps introduce more things, people need to know. It's not probably not just the signage at the park too. It's probably some sort of centralized database online, an update to the park's listing, for example, or otherwise. Because half the battle is making sure people know, right? And letting people be able to find that information easily so that right. So I'm generally okay with the way that it's written. In terms of the personal consumption of alcohol in parks, I'm generally okay with the way that it's written because it doesn't provide it's not a blanket permission. It's something where we can sort of pick certain parks for like where a group of friends can bring some wine or beer to accompany their barbecue at Britannia, for example. So I'm generally okay with that. But actually, that does bring up another question then for me. If the approval is park by park, in consultation with the councillor, would that can a pilot period like that just be implemented without motioning it in? I'm not criticizing the motion or anything, but can that be done without a motion?
I believe the motion was to try to put a bit of a guardrail around what we're doing and to limit the period to see how it goes. It asks staff to report back. And I envisioned that for the months that it would run this summer, we would monitor bylaw and police calls to the park, much like Toronto did. We would monitor and document maintenance issues, vandalism, those kinds of things, and to the extent possible, try to identify whether they were related or simply just another summer in the park where these things tend to happen anyways. There is still in the bylaw, and this speaks perhaps to Ms. Perot's comments, there is still under Section 3 of the bylaw a provision about boisterous, inappropriate behavior in the park, swearing, all of those kinds of things. Section 3 still contains that. So whether or not they are fueled by alcohol, there is still a bylaw violation that police or bylaw can act on, whether or not it's related to alcohol.
Okay, no, understood. Thanks. We'll discuss the other stuff offline to the future. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for all the work on this. It's a big task taking up bylaw in parks, and it's something I hear about every day because I got two major parks in Bay Ward, both Britannia and Andrew Hayden, and they're regional parks. They're very large parks. Plus, I have the community parks, and the big concern is beaches and safety. So the concern on alcohol, we already have a place that serves alcohol at the beach, but it's in a framework, standard patio. But I just wanted to make sure that, and I think you've said this already, but I just want to ask you again, that they would not be considered to have alcohol at a beach.
Chair, let me clarify that a bit because the way the bylaw is written, it certainly wouldn't be personal consumption of alcohol at the beach. But our beaches, for the most part, are in very large district parks. And the bylaw as written does not preclude a councillor from saying that they would want to do a pilot in those parks or designate those parks. That has happened in other municipalities, and if it's the will of committee, you could say no, no parks with a beach, or you could say no waterfront parks. When we looked at it, Ottawa having so many, the Ottawa River and the Rideau River, and so many of our parks that people talk about going on picnics, whether it's Britannia or it's Mooney's Bay or it's Claudette Kane Park, even Andrew Hayden or Strathcona, or it goes on and on. Almost every big park with nice amenities is on a waterfront. There are a few exceptions, obviously, but so we did not specifically say no to those parks. It's not in the bylaw. It's a discussion we can have as if you want to do one or some in your parks, we can have that discussion and consider the water factor as we can consider a lot of the other factors. We haven't prescribed it in the bylaw to leave some flexibility where you might say it's appropriate in this park. As long as they're not on the beach, good enough. So there is that flexibility, but a motion can change that if you believe otherwise.
Okay, I'd like to get to some comments from OPH, Ottawa Public Health, and what their specific concerns are on the safety factors with alcohol in parks, particularly beaches. I believe.
Thanks. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Trevor Arneson, the interim medical officer of health at Ottawa Public Health. Yeah, I think you're right to be cognizant of risks around water. I think that's probably the biggest safety concern that we would be bringing forward. So, of course, with water, you have the potential for drownings if people are intoxicated. There's also the challenge with bottles being broken on beaches, and the potential for cuts and other things which can cause increased risks with swimming. And so there's a lot of safety concerns that come up when you're looking at bodies of water, and whether that's ones where people are entering the water through a beach, or whether it's a park bordering on a body of water where there maybe isn't a beach, but still people may when drinking alcohol may decide to swim in unregulated areas and those types of things. So yeah, that is a bit of a safety concern that there's some setbacks that are included in the bylaw, but also I think in terms of the conversations around selections of parks would be important considerations.
Thank you. And these have been concerns that we've had already, even without, the bylaw in place. So I appreciate your comments, and safety is a major concern at our beaches. Thank you very much, Dr. Anderson. So if I can get back to the staff, I just want to ask about if you did have any parks that were in pilot projects. I wonder about bylaw enforcement, because is there any increase in bylaw? Because it's hard enough to get bylaw officers out to parks on a regular basis. People think they're on call and they're going to come like that. And because there's a number of infractions all the time. Smoking is actually a biggie where people smoke in parks and they're not supposed to. But is there any kind of budget for that? Because that's the concern, is if you're allowing something and it's being monitored, who's monitoring it?
Chair, and I'll start, and I believe Roger might be available to comment, but we have been speaking to bylaw throughout the last year in terms of developing this report. We are mindful now that should the pilot period be approved, it is over the summer months, and at least a portion of that, I believe, bylaw services is bolstered by their students that they bring on during the summer. But I think bylaw could perhaps speak to that in more detail. There's Roger there.
Unfortunately, the sound is off and you're not Jake Gravel.
Frozen. There. Let me go to my settings.
Okay. We can hear you now. Kind of.
Mr. Chapman, could you try speaking for committee? Okay, it appears we're having some technical difficulties with bylaws. Is there anyone else from bylaw services that's able to respond? Counselor, do you have another question while we wait to see if they can resolve their technical issues?
I can move on to another question. Do I still have some time?
Yep.
Thanks. I'm moving on. Appreciate the comments about watercraft, and it's a very popular thing to launch from parks. My only concern is if we open that up and say, yes, it's okay, that I want to make it sure that it's not motorized. My concern is sea-doos. They are a huge hazard, and they're terrorizing Britannia Beach. They're coming from other sources. And I just want to make sure that it's very clear that this is non-motorized, people with kayaks and paddleboards, et cetera.
Chair, just confirming the bylaw only speaks to human-powered watercraft. The motorized watercraft, be they power boats, motorboats, sea-doos, are not included. They continue to be not allowed.
Okay, that's good to hear. I've been looking for enforcement on that from OPS because it is a major hazard, and you're aware. I'm going to switch topics to dogs. Dogs in parks. Are we okay? Okay. Dogs in parks, because it's actually something that grew during the pandemic, where must be that a lot of people got dogs. And I've been asked many, many, many times if we're going to increase dog parks, which is hard to do in an urban area where you're limited. So it's like taking park space away. But I just want to know if it's being considered, because there's a growing demand. And when we don't have space for them, they end up going to schoolyards, which they're not supposed to do, or to parks they're not supposed to be at. Or they, go into areas they're not supposed to, like playgrounds. So are we looking at expanding dog parks in any form? Because the growth is there, and we want a proper place for people to have their dogs.
Chair, two questions. At the theoretical level, yes, our recreation master plan did identify that there would be a need as the population grows to add on to our dog park inventory. At a more practical level, there is no funding program stream for dog parks. So for the most part, these have been done through cash in lieu of parkland, through ward accounts, based on councillor priorities. And I know there are some still in development or up for consideration. So I expect that we will continue to get them. But it is an unfunded need at this point, and we'll have to look at that for future budgets in terms of how we make provisions for the future. Right now, it is primarily on a priority basis within wards.
Thank you. And I mean, there's already conflict where there's off-leash areas versus no dogs allowed. And we have that at Britannia. And I'm being asked to meet with local dog owners who are concerned about the misunderstanding of people at the beach trying to go over to the off-leash dog park area. It's confusing for people. The signage is not working. And they need some kind of more specific signs to let the picnickers know where they're going, because they are not aware that they're going into an off-leash area. It's a very unusual situation, because all of it is a berm that separates it. So very unique and not really part of any other parks. And we don't want to get into fencing. So if we can have some different signage and work on that with bylaw.
So Councillor, I see we have bylaw on the
Okay.
line.
Well, that's-
I will ask too that if you have one or two questions, but then we'll move on because we do have a list, and you're welcome to come back on. But Roger Chapman is here, so you can ask your question now, and if it goes too long, I might cut you off, okay?
Yep, and I just added another one. Okay, on the dogs. Okay.
Did you want,
He got the questions earlier. Is he on?
he's on right,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
so he can respond to you.
I'm here. Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for, we had some connectivity issues, so I apologize for that. We've logged on a different laptop here, so thank you for your patience. As Mr. Chenier stated, we do have a robust summer student program within bylaw and regulatory services. So we have 20 students that are assigned to parks. They are proactive, but again, I say proactive because the proactive enforcement in the parks is really driven by complaints. So we keep a list of parks where we're getting significant complaints for, and that's where we really focus our resources and using those additional summer students that we have for the summer. In addition to that, we're really not anticipating a whole lot of additional complaints, at least not substantial number of complaints, because I think in this case where alcohol may be permitted in some parks across the city, it really will be, more of the responsible consumption of alcohol where you have, families or couples that are visiting parks and picnicking and having a couple alcohol beverages and being responsible in their consumption. The complaints that we deal with on a regular basis and, just to give you a few numbers, so last year, 42 complaints specifically to alcohol use in the parks resulted in 10 charges. And that's primarily because there's other issues. So, there's loud music being played. They're refusing to turn the music down, refusing to leave the park with the alcohol. So in those cases, they do result in charges.
Okay, thank you. The complaint that I hear from is that when people call bylaw, it's not instantaneous. And what does it take to make sure that there's sort of a more constant surveying of the issues if during peak times?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It for sure is data driven, and as I said, we do review our complaint data on a daily basis, and where those complaints are coming in at parks, that's where we create a list essentially for our summer students to monitor. So it's not to say that we're not driving through other parks that are in the community as the summer students are making their way to problematic parks, but definitely we're focusing our enforcement efforts in the parks that seem to be generating the most complaints.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I had a comment about dogs and off leash. It's a bit of a clash at a place like Britannia where there is an off leash area and then the rest of the park is no dogs and misunderstandings all the time. Do you work with parks on the signage? It can because we have signage up that is not working. It's basically saying that, this is an off-leash area, but it's not warning people that you will encounter dogs in this area. And that's been the problem. So we want them to know that that's an, off-leash area.
Madam Chair, again, Councillor, thank you for the question. So last summer, we did develop some new signage to try and clarify some of those, particularly in those mixed-use areas of the parks. So I'll take that one offline. Maybe before Council, I can touch base with you. Councillor will have a review of the signage, the current signage that's there, and see what we can do to improve clarity around the off-leash and on-leash requirements in that park.
I appreciate it. I know there's like 4 signs up, but it's not working. So the messaging isn't working. Anyway, my colleagues have tons of questions. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to thank staff for the overall bylaw review. There's a lot of good things in there that are just common sense that will improve quality of life for people. Things like the fishing being allowed in our parks, the removing barriers to murals in parks aligned with the mural bylaw, the alignment with the animal control bylaw. I have some questions around encroachment. I'll get to that at the end, but appreciate a lot of the changes that you're making that are common sense and the work that went into this. I want to clarify just off the top around the statistics that we heard. My understanding was you actually had positive responses from the majority of people. So at your park pop-ups, 60% of residents were in favor. Is that accurate?
Chair, if you combine those that said they were in favor and those that were in favor in specified locations, then yes, it's 44 and 16. So I guess it's 60%. The other 40% were a hard no.
Right. Yeah. So that, I guess that was you had the online survey, the 44 and 16, and then you had the park pop-ups, which were also 60%. So it's clear there is a majority there. This has been done in Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, some other municipalities. Just the pilot in Toronto was the most visible one, a lot of media on it. By all accounts, it seems like it was a big success in that it generated only 2 complaints over its course. Is that accurate?
From Chair, from the observations I had of the follow-up council meeting where staff reported back, there seemed to be very few complaints in terms of the park locations, which led to an expansion, I think, from 27 parks to 40-something parks. So I think staff satisfied council that the pilot had worked and that more could be done. And in fact, they did do more.
Yeah. And in your report, the research analysis says that the reported anticipated concerns regarding potential negative consequences from an alcohol in parks program did not materialize. And instead, the programs have been functioning smoothly with no reported adverse effects or impacts on municipality or the public. I think you've done a good job of laying out the criteria, the access to washrooms, the drinking water, public transit, well-lit parks. Are these criteria going to actually allow parks to be designated? Let's just say a park like Lansdowne at the Great Lawn. Is that a park that could be designated as in terms of the criteria you've laid out here?
Chair, we believe so. We believe the criteria that we have outlined is a bare minimum. There are other considerations that councillors may want to discuss as we talk about specific parks. We were mindful not to enshrine those as bylaw must-dos and that they become points of discussion that apply to each park to see if there are other circumstances that would make a criteria less of a priority than others. But we think that the package we've put together would allow councillors to designate parks in their area if there was a will to do so.
Is there a piece around equity of people's homes that they have? Like some people don't have backyards, for example. Did that come up in your discussion and research analysis?
In terms of equity, it's certainly something that we discussed, that providing access to outdoor space, and we know that during pandemic, this became people were accessing parks because they had nowhere within their own, wherever they lived, to do that. Because we haven't picked specific parks, we did not say this would address this community because of that. I believe that's the work to be done in discussions on a ward per ward basis. But I think the criteria we've laid out makes it possible because it doesn't exclude the kind of parks that might be able to fulfill that mission on an automatic bylaw basis. There may be other things as we discuss it, but I think it provides the flexibility to look at equity as a screen for what it is we want to do and still go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll follow up separately on the encroachment piece just over email. Thanks very much for all of your work and efforts on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Roger. I know. Are you still on the line? I just had some questions for you about current enforcement practices.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. And so, as you all might know, I have a park in my ward, Dundonald Park, which is frequently a site where people drink alcohol. I'm just wondering if you could let me know the kinds of things that bylaw actually provides tickets for in a park like that, where there is quite obviously open alcohol consumption. Are you ticketing for simple possession of alcohol, or are you ticketing for things like public intoxication?
Madam Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's aware of the issues that we've had in this park over the last few summers in particular. So we've had trespass issues. So we've had individuals that have been trespassed, using corporate security and other resources to be able to do that. For ongoing issues where it's, they're harassing other individuals that are using or trying to use the park to enjoy the amenities in the park. In most cases, it's difficult to take enforcement action sometimes because, people don't have identification with them. They refuse to provide identification. So often it's, education first. If things escalate and, we have the same individuals over and over again, we partner with the Ottawa Police to try and identify these individuals. And yes, in some circumstances, charges are issued, but it's typically it's not just somebody with one beer or one glass of wine in the park that we're focusing our efforts on. It's people that are creating other issues because they're intoxicated in the park.
Okay, so it's fair to assume that right now you're not specifically ticketing for the existence of a beer can, you're ticketing for behavior that might be disruptive or interrupt the enjoyment of the park for other people.
Madam Chair, Councillor, that's exactly correct, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was happy to bring this motion on Councillor Menard's behalf, but I entirely support it. And I'm really happy to see this discussion happening. It sounds strange to talk about alcohol in a park as an equity issue, but I represent one of the wards where people perhaps have the least amount of private outdoor space. And during the pandemic, I'll never forget the day that parks were officially reopened. And people were no longer, they were still not allowed to gather with their friends indoors. And I went with my family to McNabb Park with a picnic blanket and yes, with a beer. And there were hundreds of people on picnic blankets out on that field. And it was bucolic, it was peaceful, it was very charming. And it was very clear that this space was so valuable and that the people there were thrilled to be able to socialize and literally had nowhere else to go. And so I think the issue of access to outdoor space is actually an equity issue. I agree with Cheryl. We certainly want to make sure that other park users can enjoy the park. But, I quite often see cans of beer at the skate park at McNabb. It is not being overly enforced. As long as people properly dispose of their cans and are not acting in a way that is harmful to other people, I really don't care what they're consuming, to be honest. And so I'm happy to see this come forward as a pilot because it means if councillors don't want to participate, they don't have to participate. And I also want to assure my residents that I'm not going to choose Dundonald Park as a site for this pilot. Although people are absolutely consuming alcohol there, and I think we should be quite clear about the fact that this is a bylaw that's largely not being enforced unless there are other factors involved, whether it's harassment, public intoxication, music, yelling, and there are other bylaws and laws for those things. I think we need to recognize that the behavior is happening and it's largely not being penalized. And when we talk about the issues of carding and of racial profiling, there are major issues associated with who might be penalized for something like this versus who is obviously not being penalized. And so from an equity perspective, I actually support this pilot, and I support it because downtown dwellers need a place to hang out with other people outdoors. It's just really important. This is very common in Europe. They did a pilot in Toronto, the sky did not fall. And as you heard, it did not lead to a massive uptick in bylaw. And so I would encourage councillors to support this motion for us to try this out. If you don't want to opt in, you don't have to opt in. Let's see how it goes. And then what I would like to see in the future, should we make this permanent, is just a really clear set of criteria that staff can implement and the opportunity to pull permission if it proves to be a problem, but to really try to depoliticize this process once we have the data that the harms are quite few. So anyway, I appreciate Councillor Menard bringing this forward because it's something I definitely hear about from people in my neighborhood. I hear concerns and I also hear support. And sometimes we don't know unless we try something. So I'm excited to try it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Plante.
Yes, thank you so much. I was just wondering, what were your conversations like with the NCC on this issue? Because we already have drinking in one of the parks, Major Hills. Well, I'm sure they're elsewhere, but in Ward 12 in Major Hills, you can drink already. So I was just wondering what your conversations were like with them.
Chair, first of all, we did check NCC rules this morning, and they do not accept in where there is a specific permit to do so. So River House, places like that do allow it because they have a concession, much like the city does now. But I'll ask Josh to speak to what the NCC said to us.
Oh, so through the chair, our conversations with NCC, actually, we went through the bylaw as a whole to speak to them about certain points. The alcohol piece was not much of a concern for them, and they were more waiting to see what our approach would be. But it is clear that the way our enforcement works, we do not oversee their parks. We just enforce on the parks that are leased from them.
But did they identify, this, like, to borrow from Councillor Truster's wording, that the sky fell, or, there was just huge ruckus and mayhem and bedlam when they allowed this at their bistros?
Through the chair, no, they were entirely unconcerned with the topic.
And then, so I will say, because I've had some discussions with my community associations about this, and I've had some emails come in as well. And the general consensus is in Ward 12, nobody's applying the law anyway. So why are we even bothering having this discussion? In our parks, we have encampments for long periods of times that often get bigger. We have public drug use. And in most people's minds, this is not something that the city really cares about or that the city is acting on. So I would just urge you to consider that, because especially for downtown people who live in high rises, our parks are very, very important, and people's enjoyment of the park should be the priority. And I just want to say too, in some of our parks like Riverain, we have access to food already. We have the Rideau Sports Center. So one of the things I've been encouraging people is, if you are going to bring alcohol to a park, maybe you should have some food, or you should be near a food, maybe some greasy food. We have some great shawarma too. Thank you, Councillor Dudas. And so I would just urge you to keep that in mind, because if it may not be an issue in the suburbs and people are really unconcerned, it is an issue in areas where there's other behaviors happening that intimidate people.
Chair, I can add, and only because of the inquiry about equity, and Viola pointed out to me that as part of our consultation, one of the equity issues which we've been able to address in this is allowing barbecuing in parks. In the past, it was only allowed where allowed in designated areas, and the current bylaw removes that restriction. So if somebody wants to barbecue in McNabb Park or in whatever park, the bylaw no longer prohibits it. If there are areas we don't want people to do it, we would have to designate it as prohibited. So, and people told us they wanted to be able to go, and part of the picnic was barbecuing. That would now change under this bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carr.
Thanks very much. Thank you for this discussion. I just want to make sure I understand exactly what Councillor Troster's modification to the staff report means. There was some discussion at the beginning of this meeting about needing to have access to drinking water, but that's not part of the staff report. That's not part of the recommendations, is it?
Chair, no, it isn't. Having access to water or washrooms is not built into the bylaw. I think that's part of the discussion we'll want to have with councillors in terms of, are there alternatives nearby? Are there, is this something that they want to insist on? But it's not enshrined in the bylaw. Our recommendation is that you leave it up to the discussion in terms of the park selection. But if council feels otherwise, they can put that requirement in. It no longer becomes a flexible option in terms of selecting parks.
Yeah, that was my concern, because of somebody that represents a ward that was largely built in the 1950s. The only parks that I have with water sources would be those with wading pools, which doesn't really match. So I just wanted to make sure when we're talking about equity for those of us that have lots of parks that are just empty fields, that they wouldn't be out of the running, although it would be desirable to have a porta potty there, for example. Okay, appreciate that. And just with respect, and maybe this was discussed already, the enforcement of the 11 a.m. to 9 p.m., that would be done by the student bylaw officers. If a counselor were to have a pilot project in the ward, as is suggested by the Councillor Menard, Councillor Troster amendment, they could have more than one pilot. I just want to make sure I understand, and maybe one of you could respond. So the staff report was it be one pilot area? Your amended motion is multiple pilot areas. So that's one question. And then the second clarification is just on enforcement.
Okay, well, I can just clarify from the perspective of the motion that Councillor Menard and I worked on. Yes, I mean, you could choose one or multiple ones in your ward with the understanding. We did this because it seemed that some suburban or rural councillors may have no interest, and some of us downtown councillors may have multiple locations that we think would be suitable because we have more of a population without access to outdoor space.
Okay, so you take away, the discretion is up to the counselor completely for pilots then?
Well, ultimately it's up to staff, but the council has to concur, right?
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then just on the enforcement piece, so if a pilot was to be had even like 4 weeks in a certain park, that would work, correct? That could be an option?
It could be an option, Chair, and enforcement, I believe Roger's back on, but generally it would be the response to complaints. If it's in a park where we have programming and it was an issue caused by programming, a park with a wading pool, for example, or at the beach, if there were things that were contrary to the bylaw, we may call on bylaw in terms of flagging that. The hours that we're recommending are what we think is a reasonable period of time that somewhat matches the start of drinking in establishments, but ends it in parks before dark during the summer. One of the issues we know from experience in multiple parks is addressing issues after dark becomes very problematic for bylaw and police in terms of going into especially large parks where they can't really see what's going on.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was a bit concerned just when we were talking about enforcement, and I believe, and I may have misheard this, that Mr. Chapman mentioned about student bylaw officers being deployed this summer. And I'm just wondering, in the case where you have a challenge with excessive drinking or something gets out of control, that it's been up to the discretion of the student bylaw officers. And I just wanted some confirmation that there would be support for the student bylaw officers.
Madam Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. Yeah, so summer students are trained for these type of situations, obviously, and part of that training is de-escalation, and officer safety is obviously a #1 priority for us. But when I talk about summer students being in parks, I mean, we're dealing with the everyday issues that they're proactively patrolling and often just having regular visibility in the park deters some of that some of the negative activity that's happening in the parks. But when it comes to enforcement issues like, alcohol consumption, and when we're getting specific complaints about an area where where it's problematic, it'll be one of our, full-time staff that's dealing with that. But in addition to that, the summer students are always, we always have supervisors on as well. So they will consult with supervisors before taking any enforcement action.
Okay, thanks. And then do you anticipate one of the biggest challenges I have in my parks is just simply garbage, right? Like in the sports fields after long weekends, it is not uncommon that I'm contacting Dan and saying this is absolutely unacceptable. Large amounts of garbage left after, flag football, ultimate frisbee, cricket, whatever it may be. I've got large sports fields. Do we anticipate an uptick in, the need for greater 311 garbage patrols cleanup as a result of this?
Chair, that wasn't the experience in Toronto. We have been talking to Public Works in terms of waste management and how we would look at this. I think that it would be part of the discussion on designating a park and where the likely areas where people in that park would be consuming, and perhaps a review of where containers are to make sure there's an appropriate number and they're in the right place given this new dynamic. We don't anticipate, as you mentioned, it's happening now, and we're dealing with some of that as an existing condition. We don't expect that at those parks it'll actually bring more in. It's probably going to be more of the same, and we would do a review with Public Works in terms of how we manage that situation, and if it escalates, what we need to do to bring in additional, whether it be containers or number of times per week that we have to pay attention to removal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor King.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'd like to thank Councillor Carr for her question. She beat me to the punch around training for the students, which I was concerned about. So I just have really one follow-on question from that. If a ward does opt for a park, how will staff track and respond to community concerns after implementation, including complaints and community feedback?
Chair, I think we would follow the example of other pilot projects in other municipalities and look at the sources that we have, because let's remember this is in an open park that is not staffed on a permanent basis, but sources of information would be bylaw complaints, police complaints, reports from park maintenance staff in terms of vandalism, broken beer bottles, those kinds of things. In parks where we do have staff, wading pools, beaches, programming areas, that would be a source as well, and we would check with them to see if there's any impact on the programs, disruptions, observations type of thing. So those would be, and of course, probably neighbor complaints either directly to the department or to the councillor's offices, as the case might be. And the plan that is called for in this motion is that by Q2 of next year, we would wrap that up into an analysis on a per site basis of what happened, a global picture, and a recommendation for go forward.
I appreciate that. I think it's important that we have enhanced monitoring of this pilot project program if parks are selected. I think it's important for us to be thinking about all the run-on impacts, such as the creation of waste. My colleague, Councillor Bradley, had a great idea in terms of ensuring that the pilot parks really be considered for tri-stream waste pilots as well in those pilot parks. I think that would make sense, because that's one of the concerns I know that has emerged from the proposal of this potential pilot is the creation of more waste. But Chair, I'm really pleased that we have flexibility in terms of park selection as well as implementation. And I'd like to thank staff for this report. I think it is measured and it's the right direction to go in, to be a more permissive rather than prohibitive in terms of our practices. So I really just want to thank staff for the report, and I'd be willing to support the amended option that has been provided by Councillor Troster as well as Councillor Menard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Plant.
Yes, hi. So just one final comment. I was just thinking, I believe it's Scandinavian countries, they have something called binners, and it's like these very specific recycle bins that are dedicated to alcohol, because homeless people can take them and get money for them. They actually get more money for them than they do for cans, and they actually get more money for them if they take them to recycle and get snow than if they recycle them here. So just to maybe a suggestion and something to add to the report would be to ensure that there are adequate recycling in the parks that do have the alcohol, or that we, in areas where the counselor can suggest it, that we do have these binners. So that way you don't see people pulling up the tops and fishing around in the garbage bin for the alcoholic beverages. It could just be right there for them to take for recycling purposes.
Chair, we're happy to look at that. One of the dilemmas we have is that alcohol containers are generally not put into our regular recycling, whether it be glass or tin, considered a contaminant. And so we can work with the waste management folks to see if there's an alternative that would make sure that those containers get brought back to the beer store if at all possible, and something like that may be an option.
Thank you. I'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I just wanted to note we've had a really interesting conversation, and I know that staff put a lot of work into this bylaw. And while we're discussing a lot about the alcohol and the parks piece, and we mentioned a couple of other aspects in regards to signage and dog designations and things, this is an all-encompassing kind of housekeeping cleanup of this bylaw. Our green spaces are so important in our city. It's actually one of the best reasons why people move to Ottawa, right? They'll see our parks, our green spaces, and they'll want to live next to them. And I think the interesting part is we saw through COVID is that they're evolving. Every generation has a different need, a different use of our parks, of our woods, of these different assets. And it's time for us to do that kind of housekeeping piece to make sure that they have more, flexibility in their usage, but also that there's clarity, right? Enforcement is only good if we can have a bylaw officer out there enforcing it. But if people are clear on what is allowed and what is not allowed, I think that that's important. And I know I spoke with staff about the piece about encroachments on city public land and things. So clarity is key. I would also quickly want to say that I very much appreciate some of my colleagues who, when noticing the alcohol in parks piece, got together and said, listen, like, how can we look at this? I think we've come up with, there's a motion before us that is a very savvy path forward where we get to try it. And if it doesn't work, we change our minds. And if our residents are saying this is a fail, we go back to the drawing board. So I very much support this motion. I think that it is a wise decision to give it a try. I have a sneaky suspicion we'll find the same as the City of Toronto, where it's okay, tear the Band-Aid and we'll go for it. But I know that, as a counselor, I don't know that I've had many of my residents asking me for this. So maybe none of my parks will have it, but any of us as counselors who decide not to go forward, we'll watch the rest of you. And then you'll be our canary in the coal mine. So I wanted to thank staff for all the work they've done. I wanted to thank my colleagues for all the work they've done to get us to this point. And we have a motion before us. So I will ask if that motion is carried. Carried. Thank you. And then the report as amended, is that item carried? Carried. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, staff. So we're moving on to item 6.2, which was recreation membership and administration fees remodel. So we do have a presentation. I understand GM Chenier is going to be very quick, but because it's a bit of a switch in how we do our memberships, I think it's valuable for us to see the slides and to go through that. So I'll ask for the presentation to be brought up online.
Thank you, Chair. We will be quick. Tracy McGarry and Chantal Laporte are going to join me. They are the staff that have worked on developing this model over the last year. By way of introductory comment, I just want to flag to council, this is a large part of our fitness endeavor at the city. It's a $10.5 million business in terms of a service line that we offer to the public at more than 50 locations. And the work that we've done is, again, the same theme as the previous item. We're trying to modernize. We're trying to evolve from post-amalgamation cobbling together to something that reflects today's trends. So I'll turn it over to Tracy and Chantal so they can speak to it.
Am I on or off? Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity today to present to you what we're proposing to be a remodel of the membership passes and admissions structure. What we've done is we've designed the new model to be, with the goal of making access to services more simple, fair, and affordable for residents in the community. Based on community feedback that we've received over the years, we've simplified the pricing model to ensure that residents only pay for the level of services that they're accessing. And that would address longstanding issues we've had with pricing inconsistencies across recreation facilities across the city. The new structure will provide a greater range of access for residents to programs and make it easier for them to participate in the activities that they choose at fair and consistent pricing. So we go to the next slide. So in terms of developing the model, this is actually the first overhaul that we've done since this program was adopted in 2004. And the city's really gone through a lot of changes since then. We've added on more facilities. We have assumed the operation of facilities that were previously operated by community associations or private industry, such as Greenboro, Hunt Club Riverside, Rayfield Recreation Complex. In addition to that, the population has grown and the recreation needs have certainly evolved. So the intent behind this is to simplify, as I mentioned, make it more affordable and fair. Looking at our our current model, we classify facilities as Class A or Class B based on the amenities within it. But in terms of the services that are offered, they're essentially the same. In fact, our instructors often work in both locations. Yet, and the cost of delivering those services is also very similar. Despite that, we charge different rates based on where you access your membership, although admissions are consistent regardless of where you go. So we've seen these as opportunities to improve, as Dan said, and modernize. Current system, recognizing it's very complicated, hard for residents to understand. And so we're looking to do that while increasing access to our services and improving the user experience across all communities in the city. This also aligns with the agile government approach by simplifying so that residents can understand, but also making this program more efficient for staff to administer. In terms of the financial perspective, our intent with this is to maintain our revenue expectations as they are today in the current model, aligning with council-approved revenue targets, and not our intent to increase revenues through the modernization or the changes that we're proposing. And while we were doing our research for this program, we've benchmarked 89 cities. Chantal will speak a little bit more about those, but in that research, we were able to identify 4 cities similar in comparison to Ottawa that have also recently remodeled their membership program and have reported an increase in membership pass sales, but also in customer or client satisfaction. So we feel confident with what we're proposing to move forward with. And further, in terms of engagement with residents and staff, we consulted through Engage Ottawa, as well as social media, and by hosting public and virtual consultations with our residents to help inform what this model is in front of you. Next slide, please. So this slide essentially gives you an indication of the simple, straightforward approach that we are taking with the new structure. It's a 3-tiered structure that is applied to both membership passes and admissions. Basically, the model includes 3 pricing categories. So if you start with category 1, being our basic core services, things like swimming, skating, and access to gyms. This keeps our core services affordable for our residents. It meets our mandate to make sure that that all residents are able to access and stay active. It considers elements like drowning prevention, teaching life skills, focusing on fundamental movements, and including activities like skating, a Canadian pastime, or access to sports like basketball or pickleball that are available for all users, all ages, families, that sort of thing. The next category, category 2, has a different price point, a higher price point. And the idea behind the categories is they contain the category ahead of them, but also introduce, for category 2, the weight and cardio rooms, specialized skating, and squash and racquetball. So these are essentially activities that require specialized spaces or equipment in order to operate, so have a little bit of a higher cost there. And then category 3 being the ultimate, you could consider that an all-inclusive membership as we have it today. This category further, it's the highest costed program or service offering in terms of the membership and admissions program, because it includes things like certified instructors for those group fitness or aqua fitness classes, or extra staff to operate wave swims, for example, or rock climbing walls. So they have additional costs further. Currently, with our existing model, as I mentioned, the Class A, Class B memberships, it's limited to being available at 17 facilities only, where this new model expands that so that it's accessible at over 50 facilities that offer membership and admission programs currently. And the intent is, as more facilities come online and expand their service offerings, this will continue to grow. So it's making that access across the city much more available. And I guess in terms of fees, the fees I think I'd mentioned, our focus is on ensuring that the fees that we've assigned to these is reflective of the cost to deliver those services. So again, the fairness component in terms of what you're accessing, and they align therefore with the user fee review and the service review framework that the city focuses on. And it maintains affordability for those basic, most interested sports like swimming and skating that we have in our first category. Next slide. This slide just speaks on the benefits. So as I mentioned, we have simplified the membership and admission model, going from 14 categories down to 3. So it's a lot more simple for residents to be able to maneuver and navigate through. One Pass gives residents access to those services across all the city facilities that offer it. It's not limited or restrictive in that sense. Again, consistent across the city and inclusive. I think an example would be, a good example is a resident currently that wants to play pickleball. In the new model, that would be a category 1 membership. It's limited today to those membership facilities that we have today, but in this new model, residents will be able to access it across the city. We often get a lot of questions from residents saying, why is my membership not permitted for use at other facilities like Eva James, for example, that has a robust program. So this eliminates those confusions and expands services. In terms of affordability, as I mentioned, we have the low-cost option with the popular category 1 model, but we also have a corporate and group recreation membership policy that allows for a 20% discount. The Ottawa Public Library program or partnership that we have with Ottawa Public Library is inclusive of that group membership. So anyone with the Ottawa Public Library card can access these memberships, annual memberships, for a 20% discount. And again, we'll continue to honor the Ottawa hand-in-hand policy for qualifying clients. We are working currently to develop some tools that will help residents in that transition and understanding what this new model looks like, so that they can then make their own decisions in terms of what best suits them. And as I previously mentioned, we are aligning the cost of these memberships with the cost to deliver the service. And the revenue expectation is not changing. So we will remain with our current revenue expectation. I'll pass it over to Chantel for the next slide.
Hey, excuse me. As far as pricing, what you're seeing on the screen in the top portion is our yearly membership pass, and it's the monthly cost. It's the one that represents the best value to residents. There also will continue to have duration discounts, meaning that there will be still 1, 3, and 6 month possibilities, but the 1 year, especially with a payment plan where you pay monthly, will remain the most affordable way to access services. If we look at the pricing and we look at the adult, for example, and we look at what would be the all-inclusive or category 3 cost, we're looking at $44.31. That was the adult membership cost was what we used to determine also rebates for other age groups. So our senior population for access to membership will receive a 25% discount on what the adult membership cost is, as well as children, youth, and student will see a 40% discount. And the household rate was calculated using 2 adult memberships, and that includes a maximum of 2 adults, but any amount of children that are also in that household, and that's the cost per household. What we're seeing also is that the second chart that you see is the admissions or the drop-in visit, and the costs align again for category 1, category 2, category 3, in the sense that every time the way the membership rates were calculated, it's equivalent to 4.2 admissions. So if you are accessing a service, for example, swimming, more than once a week, it has more value for you to purchase a yearly membership instead, and that makes it very affordable. There is, as before, there is no penalty for you to cancel a membership. You can cancel at any time. We don't have any initiation fees. You can put a membership on hold, and therefore that yearly value again can be very not only affordable, but it makes it very accessible for you because you can change your mind during the year. And then we will continue to also have, as you see the line in blue, to have multiple visit passes, which is, and there will be consistent. Currently we have 10, 12, 20. They will all be 10 for the price of 9. And then next we'll look at the benchmarking for that we conducted for this. So looking at the benchmarking here in Ottawa and comparable municipalities, you can see in the chart here that we are 3rd from the top. We have the RE Center, which has a lesser cost, but only has 1 facility. We have the city of Halifax here with 8 facilities, which is also slightly more affordable than we are. And then we have ourselves at $44.31 for an adult membership for a yearly divided by 12, as you saw in the chart before. And we can see that that's very, not only, it's very competitive in the market when we look at all the other comparables that we looked at. You will see on this chart that there's 2 other notable, comparators. The one right under us would be the Greenboro Association. That was in 2015 when the Greenboro Community Center used to be operated by the Community Association. We included it there because, as you can see, the cost was higher at the time that it was the community association was dissolved. Also notable on here that you can see is the City of Toronto, which we also consulted with a great deal. The cost that you see here is actually a combined cost, because with the City of Toronto, you need to have two types of memberships to access this number of services that we do. So we have in our memberships 3 wave pools, 2 rock climbing walls, we have 44 arenas, we have 20 pools, 9 outdoor pools, we have 31 gyms and 14 weight and cardio rooms. In order to access those things in the City of Toronto, which has more sites than we do, you need to have 2 memberships. You need an athletic membership, but you also need a fitness membership, and their cost is therefore higher than what we would see for a comparable City of Ottawa. So geographically, we are bigger than Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, and this would apply to all of our sites across the city. On the next slide, we talk about the mitigation techniques for this membership change. So if we were to go to the new model, if the proposed model, and in this case, we are proposing that we would cap our increases to $5 a month for individuals and $10 a month as far as a threshold for household memberships. That would be for if people are going to be increasing more than $5 a month. What we're seeing also is that what we use to create these numbers and create this mitigation method is we used that everyone who is transferring to the new membership model would be going to a category 3. This may not be the case because we know people might not need to access only category 3. They might go to category 1 or category 2. But for this case, we only considered that they would go to category 3. So this applies, this option is applying to the current members that have had a membership for at least 6 months in the last year, so for 180 days in between May 2024 and 2025. I'm forgetting what year we're in. And it would apply on the discount would apply on a yearly membership. When we took into account what the current membership holders are, we have 7,200 members that are eligible out of the 17,384. And again, that's for people who would, that's assuming that people would go to a category 3. So that would make, what we wanted to do is ensure that no one is going to be priced out of the activity that they're taking place in. And this, in some cases, most people would be transitioning to the new membership model within the first year or the second year, as most people are actually have less, either no increase, a decrease, or less than $5. But in the cases of those most impacted, it could take up to 3 or 4 years for them to go to the new cost for their yearly membership. And we can go to the next slide. And this next slide speaks to the implementation of the model. So should committee and council approve this report, the implementation will include a robust communication and marketing plan. And this plan would include visual guides and resources online and in person. We would update our web, for example, and make sure that we are able to equip staff, residents, as well as counselors with everything, frequently asked questions, any documents that would make it easy for people to be able to understand what their needs are and where they would transfer into the new model. So we're going to communicate the change and support residents in selecting the right options for them based on what they need. The implementation for this model is at the end of 2025, and that would start the phase transition for those that are most impacted. And that concludes your presentation. Thank you. Merci to the committee, and we are ready to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. You have a question from Councillor Troster.
Hi, thank you so much. And as I've said before, it really is still a very good deal to join the city gym, and thank you for all the work you put on this. I have a question. How do you define a household when you talk about the definition of a household member?
Chair, at this point, it's two adults and their children. Essentially, if you look at the amount that we are charging for household, it is the addition of two adult memberships. And essentially, the children in the family are complementary in terms of the fee. That reflects the fact that we are trying to make it affordable for families. And we're also mindful that, at least for small children, the services that they use are primarily the public access ones like public swimming, public skating, perhaps open gym, but they certainly don't benefit from the higher range of services like the gyms and those kinds of things. We did have a look at other jurisdictions that have looked at 3 or 4 or more adults. But we have tried to stay close to part of what this is based on, which is a review of trying to recover the cost of delivering a service with the fee that we are charging. And when you add a third adult that may be taking aqua fitness and all those other things, they would essentially, each adult would essentially be getting the service for $160 a month at the top end, which, you know, and it doesn't respect that piece of trying to align the costs to deliver the service with the fee that we're charging. So what we're proposing in terms of household is as a reasonable thing, and not every provider does this. Some providers just say every adult pays their own, and if you want to buy your children, you pay for your children. So we that's where we have landed in terms of two adults and the children living in the household.
Okay, so it could be any two adults. So if you had a single parent who's living with their mother and then also children, that would be a family household.
Correct.
It's not the relationship between the two
It's not whether they don't have to be married. They don't have to.
Okay.
It could be two adults.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I know Councillor Devine and I heard from the same family where they actually have, you know, it's two adults and their one and their mom who's retired who live together, and they were frustrated because they couldn't purchase a family membership for all three of them, but it's three adults. There's no children involved. What would the option be for their senior mom in terms of getting any sort of discount? I know you mentioned you can get a 20% discount with your library card. If she's low income or on a fixed income, what are her options?
So if the mom is if the mom is a senior, then already there's a 25% discount on the adult rate. On top of that, if she has a library card, which is free and available to everyone, she get another 20%. So
She could get a 45% discount.
Essentially.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Vice Chair Bradley. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. More comments than questions. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I know that it's needed, and the simplification of all the different memberships is certainly welcome. I think, though, however, the Diane Deans Greenboro Community Center is one of those centers that is impacted heavily with respect to a lot of the participants who attend will end up having to transfer to a Category 3 membership because it's group fitness. That is very, very popular there, and it's a significant increase. So I did want to thank you for all of the transitional measures you put in place to ensure that those programs remain affordable, and of course the 20% discount through OPL and hand in hand will be options. I just want to understand, you had mentioned a bit of a communication strategy. Because the clientele that's largely impacted is seniors, will you be on site to help people understand and transition to the different memberships that they may need to access, or what might work best for them?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair, for this question. We actually already have been in contact with the staff at Greenboro Community Center as well as Hunt Club to organize some information sessions at both centers to the residents and the membership pass holders. And we're also going to make sure that we have representation from our work group at that site, at those sites, as they will definitely have more of an impact due to the transition.
Thanks so much. And then when I was fortunate to have a briefing on this in advance, and one of the things I raised is that people might not know what membership makes sense for them based on the changes. And we had discussed maybe an IT solution of having a, what membership works best for me on the website that then would produce or generate a, you need a category 2 based on your preferences. Have we looked at any type of solution to sort of reduce the questions that are coming directly to staff, but more of an IT survey-based model?
Absolutely. Actually, this was a great suggestion, and we already have someone from our marketing unit working on what would be like a self-serve tool on the website, but also something that people could use in person, but also that staff could use, so that you would be, when you're on site and you're asking these questions, you would be able to also look at it. As a resident, you can look at the options that are available to you, and we'll make sure that we educate as well as much as possible staff to be able to counsel clients on what the best options are. Excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for all this work. I suspect we'll be in close communication as we roll out through implementation, because I know there's going to be a lot of seniors who are going to feel unduly impacted by these changes. And I'd appreciate knowing when those information sessions are happening in the community. Thanks so much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all your work on this. It's great to have it more streamlined. I guess it's kind of the model when you think of, fitness, commercial fitness centers like Good Life, et cetera, where you can go to any facility. But our big advantage is we have pools, and pools, of course, my priority, but they're important. And that's a big one. I want to make sure that there's equity. You mentioned there's the 20% discount with Ottawa Public Library, and you mentioned hand in hand. I just wanted to get more information on how that works.
Chair, Ottawa Hand in Hand is a program we've had since amalgamation. Essentially, it provides up to $185 per year towards an actual subsidy. So if you have, and it can apply to memberships, and it also apply to registered programs or to just about anything that we do. And we just take that amount off of whatever the cost is going to be. So it's a deep discount of $185 per year. There is an income test for it. So it is an income tested program. Most people that are on Ontario Works or disability are essentially automatically approved, for lack of a better word. But certainly people with low incomes as well. And that's available to all Ottawa residents. It's used quite a bit. The program probably supports about $1 million a year of subsidy to program participants to help them go in. The 20% discount, even though we're tagging it as library, there is an opportunity for groups that aren't part of the library. It's really our group discount. So if 10 or more people want to join, they're a knitting club, or they're a workplace, that is available to any group of 10 that want to register and get a membership.
Okay, thank you. And is there some communications like with Ottawa Community Housing, for example, because where people are income tested, and do we anticipate an increase in that category? Because hopefully people will have more access if they know about it. They may not.
Chair, we can commit to making sure we have good communication with Ottawa Housing. I mean, in the past, we have done this. We have promoted both the hand in hand and other services. I'm not aware whether we've had recent contact or specific contact about this initiative, but it's an easy opportunity to talk to Stefan and his staff and make sure they are fully aware.
Yeah, and I think through the community houses is a good form of communication, since they reach out to residents on a regular basis. So no, I appreciate that. Do you still, we did have the briefing, but I'm trying to remember, you still have you can just get 10 passes deal, that is still available?
Yes, that is still available. It's 10 passes for the price of 9.
Yeah, okay. And the other category, and Councillor Bradley mentioned, I was just concerned about seniors, very price sensitive. And it's kind of an up and down, so I'm bound to hear about the ones that are up. So I just want to make sure that there's good communication on that, because I am concerned there's price sensitivity there. One of the jarring things of the past that we've done is I've heard when we had, major increase, for example, in pottery or whatever, and it was all at once. And it was a shock to people who had been taking things all along. So that is very important not to have that kind of, jump. So my understanding is that's not going to happen with this.
Correct, Chair. That is why we have the phase in for those that are above a threshold. And we thought reasonable that if for an individual, if it's going to be more than $5 a month, then the phase in would kick in. If it isn't, if it's $2 a month, we've built into the program that would just go ahead as an affordable, reasonable increase.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not seeing any further questions. Is this item carried?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff. So we have no in-camera items. I'm not aware of any notices of motion, unless somebody wants to correct me on that. No, I think we're good. There are no inquiries that I've been made aware of. And no other business. So we will move to adjournment. Our next meeting is Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. Are we adjourned? Adjourned. Have a great day. Enjoy the weather.